Right now, the most famous ship in history lies 2.5 miles down in the freezing dark of the North Atlantic, slowly rusting into nothing. But long before she was a tragedy, the Titanic was a miracle of steel, built by men who were certain she could never sink. I really wanted to show you that whole construction exactly as it happened. So I used AI to rebuild these scenes and bring the original black and white photos roaring back to life in color. To understand the Titanic, you have to understand the war it was born from, and it was a war fought with luxury, not guns. In the early 1900s, the richest business on Earth was carrying passengers across the Atlantic, and two British giants were at each other's throats over it: White Star Line and Cunard. By 1907, Cunard had landed a devastating blow, launching the Lusitania and the Mauretania, the two fastest ships on the planet. White Star needed an answer, and fast. So that same year, its chairman, Bruce Ismay, sat down to dinner with Lord Pirrie, the man who ran the enormous Harland Wolff shipyard in Belfast. Together, they made a daring bet. They would not try to beat Cunard on speed because they knew they could not. Instead, they would crush them in size and luxury, building three of the largest, most magnificent ships the world had ever seen, to be named Olympic, Titanic, and Britannic. But there was one catch nobody likes to mention. No shipyard alive was big enough to build them, which meant that before a single piece of the Titanic existed, they first had to rebuild the shipyard itself, even carving out a brand new dry dock, the largest in the world, just to hold a hull this size. And rebuild it they did. Harland Wolff tore down 3 old slipways, built 2 massive new ones, and threw up a towering steel cage of cranes over the top called the gantry, more than 200 feet tall. Underneath it, on the 31st of March 1909, workers laid the first plates of the Titanic's keel, her steel backbone, right beside her sister Olympic, who was already rising next to her. Just laying that keel took around 6 weeks. From there, the ship grew like a living skeleton. Up to 15,000 men swarmed the yard, working on the Titanic and the Olympic side by side beneath the largest gantry on Earth. Crews first bolted down a double bottom, a 5-foot deep sandwich of steel cells meant to keep her afloat even if she scraped the seabed, then raised hundreds of curved steel ribs, framing a hull so vast it worked like one gigantic box girder. And then came the rivets. To stitch this monster together, gangs of 4 men, heaters and holders and hammerers, drove in over 3 million rivets almost entirely by hand, a job so colossal it would have taken a single crew more than 15,000 days. But here is the detail that will come back to haunt this whole story. In the bow, to save time and money, they used cheaper, weaker iron rivets in the exact part of the ship that would one day meet the iceberg. Through 1910, that skeleton vanished behind a skin of steel. Riveting squads sealed the frame inside roughly 2,000 steel plates, some of them an inch thick and weighing several tons each, until the hull stretched an unbelievable 882 feet. Longer than 4 city blocks laid end to end, and rose 11 decks high, pierced by more than 2,000 portholes and windows. Out at the bow and stern, men still drove the rivets home by hand, hammer blow after hammer blow, while along her central hull, a powerful machine hydraulically squeezed in the strongest steel rivets of all. But building a giant came at a human price. Across the project, 8 workers were killed, and more than 200 were injured, crushed, burned, or fallen from a great height, their names mostly lost to history. And while the hull climbed, a far quieter and far more important battle was raging over the blueprints. The ship's original designer, Alexander Carlisle, begged for many more lifeboats than the law required. But Lord Pirrie wanted only the bare legal minimum to keep the decks open and elegant. Carlisle lost that argument and walked away in 1910, handing the design over to Pirrie's gifted young nephew, Thomas Andrews. Hold on to that lifeboat decision, because it is about to cost more than anyone in that room could ever imagine. And then, that October, the Olympic launched first, giving the whole world its first breathtaking gasp at what was coming. This was the year she finally touched the water. On the 31st of May 1911, around 100,000 people swarmed the banks of the River Lagan to watch. Following an old White Star tradition, there was no champagne and no christening, just 22 tons of grease and soap smeared across the slipway, and in a mere 62 seconds, the largest moving object ever built by human hands, an empty hull already weighing some 26,000 tons, slid into the river. But that launch was only the bare shell. The real magic happened next, after tugboats hauled her to the fitting-out dock. Over the following months, an army of workers poured her insides out, and the numbers are almost impossible to believe. They were lowered in 29 colossal boilers, fed by 159 roaring furnaces that would swallow over 600 tons of coal every single day. They installed 2 reciprocating engines so enormous that each one stood 63 feet tall, with a steam turbine drinking their leftover steam to spin a third propeller in the middle. Those propellers were works of art in their own right, the 2 bronze outer ones weighing around 38 tons apiece. They hung a rudder weighing 100 tons and an anchor so massive it took a team of 20 horses just to drag it through the streets. Up top rose 4 towering funnels, each one wide enough to drive 2 trains through, though only 3 ever actually worked. The 4th, a fake, added purely to make her look more powerful. And then there was the part that made her a legend. Inside that steel hull, they built a floating palace with a glass-domed grand staircase, a gymnasium, Turkish baths, a squash court, a heated swimming pool, and a fine la carte restaurant. Her own onboard power station of 4 giant generators lit 10,000 electric bulbs and fed a Marconi wireless room that could reach ships hundreds of miles away, producing more electricity than many whole towns of the day. Standing 175 feet from her keel to the top of her funnels, she was not really a ship anymore. She was a small city that could float. But just as everything reached its peak, catastrophe struck the sister ship. On the 20th of September, the Olympic was badly gored in a collision with a Navy cruiser, and the desperate rush to repair her stole workers straight off the Titanic, shoving her maiden voyage back to the 10th of April 1912. Nobody realized it yet, but that one delay had just set a deadly appointment. In the final stretch, the last pieces went in, and so did a fatal arrogance. That January, the lifeboats finally arrived, and here is the chilling truth. The Titanic carried just 20 of them, only enough for barely half the people she could hold. Why so few? Because everyone, from the owners to the press, believed the ship itself was the lifeboat. Her hull was split into 16 compartments with watertight doors that could slam shut from the bridge at the flick of a single switch. And the builders boasted that any 4 of them could flood and she would still float. A leading trade magazine had already crowned her practically unsinkable, and at a cost of around $7.5 million, she felt as close to perfect as money could buy. The flaw they all ignored was heartbreakingly simple. Those walls did not reach all the way up. So water could spill over the top from one compartment into the next, like filling an ice cube tray. By the end of March, she was finished, and on the 2nd of April 1912, with veteran captain Edward Smith aboard, she ran her sea trials out in Belfast Lough, passed with ease, and was officially handed over to the White Star Line. After 3 years, millions of hours of labor, and the lives of 8 men, the Titanic steamed off to Southampton, then out past Cherbourg and Queenstown, pointed straight at New York. The whole world watched her go, the proudest, most perfect ship ever built. And not one of them knew they were watching her sail toward the bottom of the sea. Here is what still stops people cold. After 3 years of work by thousands of hands, the Titanic survived just 4 days at sea. On the night of April 14th, 1912, she struck an iceberg, and by early morning, she was gone, taking around 1,500 lives with her, including her own designer, Thomas Andrews. Every flaw they had shrugged off, the missing lifeboats. The open-topped compartments and the weak iron rivets turned deadly in one night. She was found in 1985, a reminder that nothing we build is truly unsinkable. Subscribe and tell me which ship to raise next.